Hello, and welcome to Leaderfolk, an inclusive look inside the Jewish community. I'm your host, Sara Bogomolny. Today, I'm so glad to be sitting down with Tamar Ghidalia. Tamar is a Jew of color of Sephardic heritage, and she works as a consultant on Jewish education, arts-infused education, and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. Tamar, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
So, I would love for you to start off by just giving us a little bit of information about yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? And how did you end up doing the work that you're doing?
I was born in Tunisia, in North Africa. And my family is a Sephardic family that originated in Spain. And after the Inquisition, they settled along the Mediterranean Sea. So they ended up in Turkey, Greece, and Italy. And my great-grandparents, because of work, moved to Tunisia, which is where the two generations we were born in Tunisia there. And we were at that point speaking two languages, Judeo-Arabic with the grandparents and French, as we were a French community. Because the Tunisians got their independence in the late 50s, beginning of 60s, we had to leave and we decided to go to France. So when I was 7.5, I moved to Paris and I grew up there, doing all kind of crazy things, being part of a 5-women band, learning music, learning education and Hebrew literature. And decided to go to the United States to do the music scene. And then at the last minute after I graduated in 1976, made a decision to try and be a majority for once. So I did not have any illusions that Israel was the promised land, but I wanted to really have a sense of how to experience being part of a bigger people. So I made Aliyah in 1976 and lived in Israel for 13 years, had my first 2 daughters there, and then came to the United States, to Minnesota, with my husband at the time, who was from here. And we had our 3rd daughter in Minnesota. And since I've been here, I worked with groups with music, and mostly as a Jewish educator for a number of years, and also in nonprofits. I work with the Hmong community, with the indigenous community, with the African American and Latinx communities, and that was really where my passion of racial justice was able to express itself, as really being with people in neighborhoods and doing this work with a diversity of families.
So being in Minnesota, I think that you were involved in kind of typical Jewish education for a while. Is that correct?
I was. I started teaching Hebrew. I was preparing students for their Bnei Mitzvah with the Hebrew, learning their Torah portion, their prayers, their Haftarah. And then I became a Hebrew school teacher, then a Hebrew school principal, and then director of education at Temple Israel in Minneapolis for a number of years, and then was the principal of Talmud Torah Minneapolis, and was very active also in different synagogues, Beth Jacob in St. Paul, and most recently for the last 8 years with Shir Tikva, who is my sole congregation.
And how has the conversation about racial equity and inclusion evolved in those educational communities during your time as an educator?
I think because of who I am, you bring your identity in everything you do. So I think that I brought that sensitivity in the Jewish world much before the Jewish community became very multicultural and racially diverse. When I worked with non-Jews, I was able to speak Spanish with my Latinx community at my work. But I think what really happened is that in our synagogue, we found out that we had a number of students who were actually students who were Jews of color. And I wanted to make sure that those students could be incorporated and integrated in the life of the congregation, and that we could see all of their identities, not just the Jewish one, but also the Jew of color one. And so started doing this work with the Racial Justice Task Force at Chil Tikva for a number of years. And of course, since, what happened in Minneapolis over Memorial Day weekend and George Floyd, may his memory always be for a blessing. Everything came to the fore, and now the Jewish community in particular and the larger community is willing to explore white privilege and talking about race and trying to do better.
What kinds of organizations are reaching out to you to have these conversations now?
In the last year, I was part of the Union of Reformed Judaism Audacious Hospitality Juvenation Fellowship. And so what we did was actually DEI work, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we did a tremendous amount of training and learning for ourselves, but we also, for a few months, were assigned a camp or a congregation. And I was assigned to Camp Harlem in Pennsylvania. And I had a DEI group of 7 people with whom I met on a regular basis. And we work on a self-assessment of their institution to really see from an LGBTQ+, from a racial point of view, from abilities or disabilities, how they were faring. And so I learned a lot from working with this organization. And so now we have, a lot of congregations from the Reform movement reaching out. We have people in the Midwest. I work with Edot of the Midwest, which is a Jews of Color Alliance that is led by Shehana McKinney Balden, who is an amazing woman who is a Black Jew. And so working with her, I'm also learning a tremendous amount. And so now that we're working from home, with technology and Zoom, we are able to do national and international work, even with Israel. I'm doing a project with Israeli teens. And so that has opened a lot of possibilities to reach people further than just the local community.
I'm so glad that you brought up Edot. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you came to be involved.
So Shahana came to visit. I'm very involved with Jewish Community Action, JCA, here locally in the cities. And she came to the annual meeting last November, I believe it was. It seems like ages ago, and told us about having started this organization. And then I started seeing her everywhere. So with the Avila McCoy community meetings online, to every Jew of color space. And she and I started really talking and having conversation on a regular basis until she said, I would like you to come and join the team. I think that would be great if you could be the glue that works with all the different organizers we have in the different cities. Right now we have Milwaukee, Cleveland, Detroit, and the Twin Cities. And we're having, hopefully, Chicago join us. And in the future, we'd love to have also St. Louis and more Midwest cities joining us. What the work that Shehana does with Edot is really connecting between Jews of color, developing their leadership, centering them in the communities they live in, and giving them a possibility to be seen, recognized, embraced, and paid for their work.
Is Edot geared to serve individuals or organizations? Like, how does one get involved with the work that you're doing?
All of the above. So Edot has been responding to requests from Jewish community institutions, whether it is federations or JCRC or congregations. And so what we do is trainings and podcasts and panels and also individual customized trainings for different needs. And we also offer individual coaching. Like, for example, if we do some training for an organization, we continue supporting the director or the staff person or the leader of the organization, whether it's a board member or a staff, to really coach them to continue working with them so they're able to apply what they learned with us into their daily organization policies and practices.
Wow. How would you say that your background as a musician or as an artist plays into this work that you do now?
I think that art, and especially music, binds between people. What do we do when we see each other? We eat, not online now, but normally with a meeting, you know how Jews are. We eat and we sing. We sing, and we've been doing a lot of singing, and it's been hard because on Zoom, not everybody can sing together the same way we do in our spaces when we are person to person. But so I think that the singing is really something that connects us people. I think the fact that we can express things with art when we don't have the words is also something that is really important. And the creativity that goes with everything that is artistic helps us to reach people in different ways. So it's not always the academic, the intellectual, but it's also through the arts and through the heart.
So when you talk about arts-infused education, what might that look like?
Well, I can tell you exactly what it looked like when I worked for 6 years at Urban Arts Academy that doesn't exist anymore. We had an organization for 18 years that is located inside the Calvary Church on 39th and Chicago, a block from where George Floyd was murdered. And we had a tremendous amount of students and families in the community that was super diverse. And what we did with the kids was learning about artists. We had an artist of the month, learning through the artist's eyes, learning about their background, their ethnicity, their race, how they worked in the community they grew up in, which impact did they have, and we learned their styles, and whether it's classical artists or people who are alive that we were able to bring into the students. The fact that we were studying everything through the arts really made the students stronger, and they were much more focused in their regular school because they were so curious. They were so open to learning and exploring. And so they had really good habits when they got to kindergarten and beyond in the schools. We had them in a preschool, and we had after school program and summer programs. So we were able to have our preschooler go to the community in different schools in kindergarten and come back to us as students in our after school and summer program. So we were able to follow them for a few years, and they became not just amazing artists, but amazing people of the world.
Yes, art helps with self-development and confidence in such profound ways.
It does.
And what does your own personal artistic practice look like?
Well, for me, I grew up with a family, as I said, who was Sephardic, and my grandmother had a beautiful voice. So she sang and played the darbuka, which is the humdrum that we call dumbek or any kind of other names here. And so I started singing and playing percussion when I was really young. And when I went to France, I wanted to do that in a way that was more formal. So I went to study in a conservatory of music, and I graduated from the Conservatoire of Paris. At the same time, I graduated from my studies in education and Hebrew literature. And so I was able to have the background for classical music, playing in orchestras and singing in choirs and small groups, ensembles. But I was also able to play the music of my grandmother and be able to continue her tradition as Sephardic music. And I did this here for a long time. We also had a group, a quintet here called Kolot, Voices, and we performed for the Jewish community here and in Canada.
This might be a personal question, but I'm curious how your relationship to your Jewish practice has evolved, starting off in Tunisia, where the Sephardic culture was probably just more common, and then coming to Minnesota, where I think Ashkenormativity is probably very, very prevalent, and how that's influenced your relationship and your practice to Judaism.
It's really interesting because, Sephardim usually are masoltiim, so they are traditional, which means that they kept kosher in the home and ate vegetarian outside. We went to synagogue on Shabbat and holidays, but everything that happened Jewishly happened in the home. I remember beautiful Passover seders that we used to do, and all in Hebrew chanted, and then all the commentaries the second night. So we had a very rich Jewish life. And then I went to France. So in France, again, we went to synagogue for just holidays and sometimes for Shabbat if we had a synagogue in our neighborhood. But the Jewishness happened in the home with the passing of traditions in the family, the gathering for Shabbat and holidays and all that. And then in Israel, interestingly enough, I lived in Jerusalem, so it was easy to keep Shabbat. So I did keep Shabbat there, but I didn't go to synagogue at all, almost never, other than sometimes with my father when my father was singing in a Sephardic synagogue in our neighborhood in Givat Mordechai, was chanting on Yom Kippur. So I would go and listen to him. But other than that, we breathed the Jewish life all around us. We lived according to the Jewish calendar. So I did not have the need for that spiritual space that was the synagogue. And then I come to the States where everything is in the synagogue. What usually community centers and synagogues do, and the home is centered around the synagogue life. Synagogue offers the spiritual space, offers the education for children and adults, offers all of that. And so for me, it was a really hard to adapt to because I was not used to it. But now, I understand what it's important to have this life centered around the synagogue, because not everybody can have a Jewish home when they can express their Judaism. So I'm getting used to it more and more. And I smile sometimes because I don't really have a denomination. I happen to belong to a Reformed synagogue, but I don't have a strong affiliation, no Orthodox, no conservative, no Reconstructionist, no Reform. For me, I'm a Sephardic Jew who feels comfortable in most spaces where I can recognize sometimes the music I grew up with, because I had to learn here all the nusach and all the way of chanting and all the melodies and all the prayers. I had to learn them the Ashkenazi way. So I am very grateful when some of the times people are willing to learn my melodies so that I can remember my childhood and how we sang those same prayers.
And have you passed along that Sephardic heritage even to your children who grew up in the States?
I actually did, because when my father was sick, he had had a stroke a few years after I left Israel to come to the States, to Minneapolis. And he was sick, but I had asked him to have a nap every day and let me record him for 45 minutes a day, where he would do his Sephardic Kiddush, his Sephardic Havdalah, chant all the Passover Seder, all the melodies that I was afraid to forget because I don't hear them every day here. And so I have a CD that I actually gave to each of my children. And when we gather, we sing definitely a lot of Sephardic melodies. But sometimes, I would be leading a Sephardic Kiddush, and then the Ashkenazi one melody would get infiltrated in that, and we would switch to the Ashkenazi one. So I think we have really integrated both traditions.
I'm going to interrupt us for a moment here to share this recording of Tamar singing the Sephardic Yigdal. I hope you enjoy this little time out, but if you'd like to get back to our conversation and find out what is inspiring Tamar these days, skip ahead. That's so beautiful. What a gift to be able to pass along to your kids from your father. Wow. So what else inspires you? What else is kind of keeping you up at night or giving you fire to keep moving forward?
I love people. I'm an extrovert. So being with people, having an exchange and connecting with people is to me amazing. I think during this pandemic, a strong feeling that has developed in me is this need to be part of a space with all Jews of color. So I don't know if you know Yavila McCoy, who is the executive director or CEO of Dimensions, is an amazing Black woman who is so spiritual and such an educator. Provides a platform for us to meet every 6 weeks as a community, to be online together, to sing, to pray, and to have breakout groups to discuss what we want to do to build a world that would be an anti-racist world. How would it look like? And which legacy do we want to leave to our children and grandchildren? So that has been something that has been really rewarding for me, is to be able to be in those spaces when I'm not the minority again, and where people from all over are there, and they're all Jews. That's what binds us, this Jewishness of this Jewish values that we bring to the space. It's beautiful. So that inspires me tremendously. And I think for me, I always wanted to change the world. When I was in France as a teen, I was always in the streets, because in France, when you were unhappy with the government, you just went and demonstrated, and then that worked. We pulled pressure and it worked. When I was in Israel, I was part of Shalom Adult, of the Israeli Peace Now. And so, and here I got involved, as I said, with Jewish Community Action, that does a tremendous amount of work with local racial and social justice and campaigns. I've been with them since the inception of the organization in 1995, and they represent my values, and that is the reason I'm involved with the work all the time. And they have been extremely helpful in this time of pandemic and since the uprising, to give us direction and to be able to center our work around our Jewish values, but having a vision of the larger world around us. So I'm involved with my synagogue. I'm involved with JCA. I'm involved nationally and internationally with my Jews of color community. All of this makes me happy. And I have hope that maybe we'll have a better life for our children and grandchildren.
I certainly hope so. I'm curious, based on what you're saying about the other protests or demonstrations that you've witnessed or participated in across the world, how do you look at what's been going on over the past few months? Like, what inspires you? What do you think that allies could be doing better? What would you like to see?
For me, it was a revival, even though I haven't been able to be part of the protests in person because I'm a high risk for the pandemic. So I haven't been there, but I'm doing a lot of organizing and work behind the scenes. it has really reminded me of the power of the people in the streets and the movement and the possibility to come in masses and influence the entire world globally, not just locally or in our country. And so that gives me hope, that inspires me that with this work, we can get somewhere. On the other hand, I also know this work is exhausting because we need to fight all the time for things that should not be fought about. We should be able to access everything and every resource and be who we are everywhere and anywhere. So sometimes when Jews of color are tired, and particularly Black Jews are tired, we want to support them and we want to be able to pick up the rhythm when they are out of breath a little bit, out of energy, and when their body feels absolutely exhausted because of all the trauma they experience all the time. So for me, I am hopeful because I think that we cannot not do this work. And I think for the first time, the world is seeing us. So we need to continue to maintain this rhythm and the presence and the movement and the work that we do and move forward.
What a gorgeous message, and what a beautiful note to end on. Tamar, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing of yourself and your experiences and your expertise. It's been amazing to get to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Sara, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Leader Folk is all about elevating voices and starting conversations. So now we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@tcjewfolk.com to share your thoughts or ideas or to nominate future guests. Leader Folk is a project of Jew Folk Inc. and the Jew Folk Podcast Network. For more information, visit tcjewfolk.com/podcast.